Hey y'all, Andrew here with Free Tours by Foot New Orleans. Our walk today is going to be around the Marigny. This is a neighborhood right outside of the French Quarter, known among our visitors best for Frenchmen Street. Quick little area that provides the highest concentration of great local style music in town. So we're going to start off with that street, give you a little bit of a sense of where things are right now as it's gradually on the up and up. And since that's one of our oldest neighborhoods too, we'll see some classical New Orleans housing and talk about some of the characters who lived there. So, exploring a Creole neighborhood in just a few seconds. You'll drop us a like and a subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you think. And if you want to tip your guide, you'll see how to do that down below. Let's get started. Alright y'all, we begin at Decatur and Barracks, made by Cafe Envie, the Italian Barrel, the very end of the French Market, and the New Orleans Jazz Museum. Starting us here just because this is the way that, I'm about to say that people do get to Frenchmen Street. This is the way people probably should get to Frenchmen Street. This lower Decatur area, any of the streets in the French Quarter will lead you to the Marigny if you just follow them far enough. But this one leads you straight onto Frenchmen, so it's a little less confusing if you're new to all this orientation. And Lower Decatur itself has a sort of similar history to Frenchmen, so this whole stretch going back a few blocks sort of came about in the same kind of cluster of phenomena that gave us Bourbon Street. So like very briefly, back before Bourbon Street was what we know it as today, it was a kind of local style music area in the 1940s and before. Got very rock and rolly in the 50s, very t-shirt shoppy and drink from a windowy in the 1960s and 70s. And so, you know, people who lived here wanted something else. There's always been a kind of delicate balance whereby a local music scene, jazz, blues, funk, all that stuff that we're really into here, needs a certain amount of tourism to be sustained, but it needs only so much before it kind of averages out to what the rest of the country is listening to. So Lower Decatur popped up that same 60s, 70s era as an alternative, and Frenchmen kind of naturally grew out of that as the Marigny was also turning into this very big destination neighborhood, which it is way, way more so now than ever. BMC is kind of the beginning of the strip, so as you're coming down you can follow your ears. Balcony Music Club right here. And you can see the kind of standoffishness that Frenchmen used to have from the very first venue when you cross the street. It's called Checkpoint Charlie, the implication being that you are crossing the Berlin Wall. In the metaphor, this is definitely East Berlin, but it's a lot less rough than it used to be. Still wants to look standoffish, but things have changed here a lot. Louisiana Music Factory over here is a great landmark, really easy to recognize, bright orange, and it's an incredible music store. So if you hear somebody that you like, and they haven't had the presence of mind to bring any of their albums with them, that's the place to hit up, and you can get a lot of them, even on vinyl. Definitely some turnover from the 2020 year. This used to be a Lebanese restaurant and is now an Egyptian restaurant. Maison, seeing it open for the first time in a while. Villas over here. Looks like they're between sets right now. 13. Not a music venue, but some noteworthy food. Good hangover material. Pre or post. 30 by 90. Depending on how recent your memories of Frenchmen Street are, if you have any. This place across the way used to be Yuki Izakaya. We had an actual Japanese pub. Three Muses, not quite open again yet. And also depending on how dated your memories are. Praline Connection used to be here. It was one of the older institutions on the street, but now this is Willie's Chicken Shack. So, churn continues. Favela Chic across the way was a pretty new one back before. And Frenchmen Street Art and Books. This place is actually the oldest surviving vestige here at this point. This has been a LGBT bookstore, although it has, other books too, going back into the 1970s. That was really the scene that made this place happen. Artists and gay folks tend to be the tip of the spear when it comes to gentrification. We've got DBA. They've been doing outdoor music. We're on a little bit of a set break, so let's catch some music when we come back. Got the Spotted Cat, the Institution. Nice, good, got it started. And we've got Snug Harbor. Only doing food right now, no music yet. Snug is it's the oldest music venue on the street at this point, going back into the 80s, and that's your real serious jazz, other roots genre place. We lost Ellis Marsalis in 2020. He had been playing more or less weekly there, going back pretty much to the beginning. Royal Frenchmen right here. Has a little bit of space in the back. It's a hotel with a musical courtyard. We'll be back through all this in a little bit more detail. That is it. That was Frenchmen. All 2 blocks of it. It is a really compact little space, in large part just because zoning and neighborhood noise regulations and so on make it pretty tough even to continue what's already there, much less to expand it further. But when it's at its full force, in the course of a walk there, you really do tend to hear a little bit of all the different local styles. So, a lot to love, even as compact as it is. Speaking of lovable compactness, the houses in the neighborhood, we'll be seeing all manner of these, but this is a super colorful neighborhood, and with the classic house types that make up the French Quarter, built a little later, and so with some creative variations, you start to see some riffing on the classics out here. Just get a look at the humbler stuff for now and make our way along Esplanade Avenue by the mansions and so on. Get a sense of where all this came from. So as we look ahead, y'all can see 3 different neighborhoods right now, actually. So off in the distance, you've got the skyscrapers. Well, first and foremost, let's do in between, just past the stoplight up there, is the French Quarter. Got the art bar. I might have seen this in our film and TV locations video. So just past the stoplight is the French Quarter. French Quarter is the original city, originally surrounded by plantations. People get serious about their parking, y'all. A driveway, never mind, rare privilege. So, French Quarter being surrounded by plantations, owners sold off as the need came for the city to expand, and things on every side of the French Quarter turned into new, what they called faubourgs, small cities, false cities is what that literally means. So, Faubourg Tremé, out to our right, Faubourg Sainte-Marie, straight out ahead of us, where the skyscrapers are today. There you go. And Faubourg Marigny, right here. All 3 of those are named after the families that own them. And Faubourg Marigny gets its name from Bernard du Marigny, So when he was a kid, late in the 18th century, you'd have seen a wall all along here. This is Esplanade Avenue. The wall of the city ran in sort of a diagonal, so none of these houses would have stood. And even over in the French Quarter, none of those would have been there either. But the French Quarter filled up with time. And while Bernard de Marigny wasn't the first to sell, he was still early into the game. So, 1805, 1806, basically as soon as he's old enough to decide for himself, inherits a massive amount of property as a very young man, makes the decision to split it all up, keeps the family home, old plantation style house, but then subdivides all the other stuff around it. So, more so than most of the other people who did this, he took a really active hand in what his neighborhood became. And he particularly liked keeping his neighborhood to people like himself, somewhat like himself anyway. So the instrumental conflict of his lifetime was between what we can simply call Americans and Creoles. Bernard de Marigny was Creole. This was your French speakers, your Catholics, regardless of race, because they could be all different combinations of African and Latin ancestry. They had some commonalities in contrast with the Anglo-Americans who were coming down after the Louisiana Purchase. Port of call over there is the French Quarter's renowned burger joint. So Bernard de Marigny was very pro-Creole. He knew how things worked, and he was lucky enough that he got shipped off to be educated in London as a young man. So he spoke English, which was very useful here. And he married a woman whose family came from New York. But he still did everything he could to maintain and perpetuate Creole power in the city. His house would have looked something like this. I don't have a whole lot of this stuff on Esplanade, but raised house like this with huge stairs in the front, elevation for flood purposes. Something like this would have sat over near the river and would have towered above all the houses that got built on the land that he sold off. As Creoles moved into this space, they were, some of them just getting away from the constraints of the French Quarter, some of them getting away from the close attention of the French Quarter, and you also had some who were newly arrived. Creole tended to mean you were born here in town, but we also have the Haitian Revolution that happens while all of this is underway, and the folks from Haiti, Saint-Domingue back then, had a lot more in common with Creoles than they had with Anglo-Americans, so they tended to settle in here too. So one of the places where you get our super bright color palette from is the islands. Howdy. And to give you one example of somebody who bought a piece of land from Bernard de Marigny, right up here we have a house owned when it was first built by Charles Laveau. If that name rings a bell to you, he is the father of Marie Laveau, famous as New Orleans' voodoo queen. Quite the mystery in herself. We're actually going to have a whole video devoted to her pretty soon. So we'll get, via the expertise of our voodoo tour guides, into a bit more particulars on that. But Charles Laveau, one of the examples of a mixed-race Creole man who would have felt closer to Bernard de Marigny, or at least knew he had more leverage with Bernard de Marigny, than with the Anglo-Americans next door who weren't used to the kind of, let's say, racial subtleties that people were used to here. One of the things that the Marigny is known for is being the home of a lot of people who were part of the system referred to as plaçage. There's a lot of legend around this thing, but basically it was not uncommon for married white Creole men who would be married eventually, or men who were already married, to have a mistress who was mixed race, who they were not legally allowed to marry. Sometimes these people were not married to someone else. Sometimes they just had a non-marital relationship for their entire life. And oftentimes, those folks would be put up over here somewhere. The mistress and potentially whatever children were born of that match. So there was a concept of romance and genuine satisfaction versus marriage, which was about politics, at least for the man in the relationship. For women, a lot is left unsaid there. So plenty of these homes would have been for people like them, and we can get into the complexities of some of their stories as we go on. Anyway, Bernard de Marigny took on for himself the business of naming all of these streets, and he seemed to have a little bit of a sense of his own kind of humor around what they were called. So you had in French, Street of Love, a Street of Good Children, and a lot of streets named for things that he took pretty seriously in his own life. There was a Craps Street. He was very fond of the game. There was a Duels Street. He's a legendarily, at least, avid duelist, although he turned his back on that when one of his sons was killed that way. And his names extended to lots and lots of other stuff too. Music Street, Arts Street, all kinds of romantic texture. Frenchmen, too, is one of his own names. But most of them didn't last. The thing is, here again you can see, these roads stretch into the French Quarter. And they have different names over there. And then the street names all change again at Canal Street. So there was a lot of room for confusion here. But it was put up with for a long time until enough churches located themselves onto Craps Street, named for the gambling habit, and at their request, the names of the French Quarter streets were extended down here into the Marigny. We had a few landmarks here on this street. As for one, actually, double back a little bit. So this is the very end of Bourbon. Bourbon feeding into Poget. Lots of people in the neighborhood say Pogger. You can see how these traditional houses were built. So this is a variation on a Creole cottage. Classic construction is posts with bricks in between. Usually there's plaster over it so you can't see the materials like this. This one gives you the inside scoop. Got a plastered Creole cottage over here. And this one, after various pieces of a long and storied history, ends up in the hands of an architect for restoration, an architect much better known for something else, which was the Superdome. Other than the arguably black and gold elements on here, you would never know. But across the way, we see the style changing over time. We have here a Creole cottage with a center hallway. I don't think we have anything quite like that in the French Quarter. You have your classic, what becomes a real norm thing in the rest of the city, which is shotgun houses, which there aren't too many of in the French Quarter. This is a camelback version, so you have that raised portion back there. And over here we have an innocuous little home structurally, but it's got an interesting story behind it. So, Joseph Prieto, the owner of this, was a 19th century free man of color. This is the term of art from the time. Contracts, bills of sale, birth records, all kinds of things would have referred to people as free man or free woman of color in whichever of the various colonial languages were used here. Joseph Prieto was one of the many who was himself free but was related to people who were enslaved. So when he died, he left in his will a requirement that the sale of his house finance the purchase of 2 members of his own family. But in that same will, he also liberated several enslaved people who he himself owned. So free people of color did occupy this place of, I guess the best word I would say for it is a decent amount of flexibility. There was the ability that freed slaves would not have some other places to own property and kind of become part of the system that they themselves had been ground under at one point, and it wasn't too out of the ordinary to see them do that, even as they retained, as you can see, out of that particular will, some sympathy towards at least specific other enslaved people. Now here we have a musical landmark. Right over here is the home of, her stage name was Lizzie Miles. So this was a jazz age, like pretty early blues performer. She performed a lot of styles, but she made some of these very early blues recordings. And among various interesting things about her career, one of them was that she sometimes sang in Louisiana Creole. So plenty of folks in the neighborhood would have been bilingual, speaking English and Louisiana Creole. This is even into the 20th century, up to World War II or so. And some of them would have been monolingual in Louisiana Creole. And you actually can find Lizzie Miles singing in Louisiana Creole if the idea of this language intrigues you at all. There's a classic jazz number called Et là-bas, E-H space L-A space B-A-S. And she does a rendition of it, which you can find on YouTube, this wonderful platform that you're on. And the whole thing is sung, at least in her version, in Louisiana Creole. And I will say, if you are somebody who understands any Louisiana Creole, get ready for some pretty explicit language. And if you don't understand Louisiana Creole and that makes you jealous, then you should listen to her song, My Man O' War, Man O' War, and you'll get some more subtly vulgar lyrics. Not quite as over the top as the Creole stuff, but both good listens. Just pay attention to the words. We've mentioned some of the more famous local free people of color on some of our previous videos. If y'all saw the bike ride we did up the Mississippi River, we visited the site of a fort from the Civil War that was key in the history of the Native Guard, which was a division of various local militaries that consisted completely of free people of color, and one person we talked about was Andre Caillou. And Mr. Caillou was a free man of color from this area, someone born enslaved, who got his way out of slavery partway through his youth, and died in a battle where he stood pretty much zero chance of survival, but threw himself into the cause anyway. possibly to disprove notions that people like him weren't up to that challenge. Well, one of the things he would have had to live for was his wife, and she, Félicité Caillou, was involved in a pretty good cause here in the neighborhood. So at the spot where we've got this little educational institution here, formerly stood, this is a kind of descendant of it today, but used to be the Institut Catholique, the Catholic Institute. This was a hard-won victory by free people of color in the neighborhood to get the city to allow them to create, pre-Civil War, an educational institution for orphaned free children of color. And what they created was essentially an orphanage with some education, some hope built into it. And André Caillou's wife, for quite a while, was the person responsible for the day-to-day care of these dozens of orphans who occupied that place. Different building than what you see now, but it was also, the whole thing was funded by a gift from a free woman of color who left it in her will, and it was a protracted legal battle to get that will honored. Howdy. House watching is one of the great pleasures of this neighborhood, y'all. They are pretty heavily Airbnbs these days. So, mentioned earlier that this had become a destination neighborhood. In some sense, back in the 1970s, you had a wave of queer and artistic, and sometimes both, people moving to the area and, looking for a safe haven in and around the French Quarter. And that, like I mentioned, often leads the way. Quick side note, former bank, now restaurant. Y'all might have heard of the Ruby Slipper. It gets recommended a lot as a breakfast, brunch, lunch destination. And there are locations uptown and in the business district. But this one doesn't get as much love as it deserves. So if you want to skip a line, this is the place to come to. I'd say there won't be a line, but there will usually be less of them. As an example of the folks who came and left a mark on this place in the 1970s, got a house down the way that belonged to a couple of note, and on this just awesome block. I know it's probably easy to look at this stuff and think that these bright colors are some kind of modern imposition, but it ain't necessarily so. In fact, this one looks pretty much as it did in the 1850s. They were careful to get the shades just right. So this is an 1800s home, 1830s, the way it looks now. You can see sort of a type of Creole cottage, but it looks like it's built of stone blocks. These are cypress panels added onto it. And when this house was new, it was owned by an interesting example of this whole pattern. So, a Dutch Jewish guy named Asher Moses Nathan, and he moved to New Orleans, got into business, made a bunch of money, married, and had a placé, one of these mistresses who lived down here. And he had 3 houses. He was well enough off to have a house on Canal Street where ostensibly he and his wife lived. He had this house down here with the placé, whose name is unknown. And then, since the wife didn't care much for New Orleans, they had a house out on the Gulf Coast where she spent most of her time. So it seems like likely he had a house where he could be with one, a house where he could be with the other, and a house where he could be with himself. And ultimately, he never had any children by his wife. But the mistress had a couple of children, and after the wife died, he adopted them. So as much as legal decisions can show us what people felt, it does suggest kind of the emotional complicatedness of these sorts of relationships, or at least the complex sense of responsibility. Well, come the 1970s, this place was in pretty rough shape, and a couple, Gene Cizek, who was the founder of the Preservation Studies program at the Tulane School of Architecture, and his partner Lloyd Sansa, who was an artist, high school art teacher, and eventually a tour guide. Haha. They bought the place, did an extensive restoration on it. What up, y'all? And they made it the home of their preservation education efforts. So they had a kind of nonprofit type organization that showed kids the archaeological finds from the grounds. They've got a huge live oak tree back there that it's named after. They called it Sun Oak. And they also were key in the creation of the gradual steps towards having a historic district in the neighborhood. So, definitely extremely influential people, and also, I think probably more or less by chance, friends of the Marigny family. So, Bernard de Marigny has descendants today. He has a living great-great-great-great-grandson, I think I got the number of greats right, who is a parish historian for one of the parishes a little upriver of New Orleans. And being an admirer of people who are like him, just so about their history, fell in with Gene and Lloyd. And when Lloyd passed away, Gene is still living as of recording this. When Lloyd passed away, this member of the Marigny family offered the two of them a place in the Marigny family tomb, which is in St. Louis Cemetery number 1, the oldest cemetery in the city, and a Catholic cemetery. So, gay couple of I don't know what creed they do or don't belong to, but in a ostensibly Catholics-only cemetery from the 18th century, thanks to this odd combination of circumstances. So while they are no longer with us, they're definitely part of a bigger legacy. There was a huge boom in people seeking this place out. It's sort of what happened in the 1970s, but so much more after Hurricane Katrina. There was this sense a lot of people got from visiting the city and getting a glimpse of it in its vulnerable state that it was in at the time, that they could be a part of something not only that needed their help, but this, this place that reeked of, I'm going to use a word in air quotes, authenticity, which is very much, a concept that a lot of people are looking for out of their lives and their travel and so on. So coming here was an intuitive thing to do, but of course the Marigny was already occupied and discovered, and folks coming in were often coming from other cities where they might not have felt well off, but they quite definitely were relative to the New Orleans average. And so the Marigny today, the natural steps that follow that dictate that the Marigny today is a pretty expensive neighborhood. Airbnbs have made that more so, and it really is the case study for gentrification here. But you still have a lot of those 1970s folks who have moved in. It's also one of the reasons why this is the home of New Orleans' AIDS Memorial, which is what this is. The park around us here, Washington Square Park, comes right up to the edge of Frenchmen Street. You can see another big catalyst for the preservation movement here. This massive building over here is the Christopher Inn. This was formerly a site of a church and a library. Apparently really lovely buildings, and they were torn down to make room for this thing. And for people who valued the character of the neighborhood, this was a call to action. And that's part of what got the historic district created, was a lot of enthusiasm on the part of neighborhood residents to see that things like this, if they were built at all, either moved into an existing structure, of which there are a great many of a pretty significant size. There's a manufacturing history in the neighborhood too, or built something original that was in keeping with the neighborhood's scale, style, etc. So this butts right up against Frenchmen. We'll pay it a second visit in a moment. Also definitely got to step out onto Elysian Fields. So Elysian Fields over here is one of the streets that still has the name that Bernard de Marigny gave it. It is not the paradise of the Greek heroes by any means. It's a big, wide, nice enough street. Formerly had a canal. It had a very early train for the city known as Smoky Mary that ran the way out here to Lake Pontchartrain. And it's also a site that, if you've heard the name from outside New Orleans, the likeliest reason is because you have heard or seen A Streetcar Named Desire. A Streetcar Named Desire is set right over here. So when Blanche Dubois arrives in her very first appearance in the play, she says, "They told me to take a streetcar named Desire, transfer to one called Cemeteries, and get off at Elysian Fields." And it's a line written for pure poetry. Those were all directions that you could have taken. There was a streetcar named Desire that ran through the French Quarter down towards Desire Street, very much a part of the Bernard de Marigny School of Street Naming. There was a streetcar named Cemeteries, and there still is. You can ride that one on Canal Street. And there's a Elysian Fields Avenue right here. But the three don't connect, so you couldn't actually have done the directions she's given. They just kind of give this impression of the metaphorical journey that she was on. Anyway, if you've seen the movie, they go out of their way to set it in the French Quarter, and there is mention of the French Quarter in the script, but the address being down here in the Marigny, it gives a clue to what Tennessee Williams intended. He lived in the French Quarter several times for a lot of accumulated time. And so he knew the place really well, but he decided to set his story in this immigrant-heavy, working-class, mixed-race neighborhood where you still heard probably a bigger variety of languages than you heard in the French Quarter in his day. In any case, if you get to know the Marigny a little bit, it's worth reading the play with that often missed fact in mind. I'm walking down a little bit on Elysian Fields just to point out a key visual. So you can see the sort of industrial character of this whole area. Some stuff that's been, I think this was a funeral home over here. Had some new construction going up over here, but a big warehouse was torn down there pretty recently. Got a power station down at the end of the block. And then this business, which is part retail now. Power station back there is where Bernard de Marigny's house used to be. So the most splendid spot in the neighborhood is now this sort of, visually at least, it's sort of an industrial wasteland. So it nods towards what else went on in Bernard de Marigny's life. He was a pretty powerful man for a long time. You hear him talked about... The wall is asking a question. You hear the story told that Bernard de Marigny was this dissolute gambler and that he lost all of his money to that. There's not any real support for that, although the legend certainly says what Americans thought of Creoles, that a lot of the big mascot for Creole power had to be talked about as this sort of effete man with no self-control. As it was, he was extremely wealthy for most of his life, and the thing that ruined him, the Panic of 1837, this huge financial panic, ruined an awful lot of people, and he had extremely bad luck. That panic coincided with some river floods that destroyed some of his plantations further north of New Orleans. So all that to say, the bad circumstances that befell him would have taken out just about anybody. But as it is, his second wife also didn't care for him and got a sort of separation from him, and she arranged to live in one floor of the house while he lived in another, and they did not cross paths, although he paid for everything for the rest of her life. And after she died, he moved out. Couldn't hang on to the house any longer. He actually got a job. Not a thing the Creole gentry typically did. He was a recorder of mortgages, and so you can actually go into the land records office here, and you can find old handwritten contracts in French with his name on them, where land in the Marigny, once his plantation, is being traded from one party to another, something he once would have been signing on the seller line, and now he's just basically notarizing it. So it was a far fall, even if not as far or for the same reasons that legend often tells us. And he came to live in this place over here. Lived out his last years there. Got to be known for coming out with a desk onto the sidewalk and just writing letters in his robe. Not nearly the distinguished presentation that would have been expected of an upscale Creole man, and people gossiped. But when they complained, he basically said, "It's too dark for me to see inside. My robe is cashmere, and I'm Bernard de frickin' Marigny. Don't tell me what to do." He was taking a walk one day at the age of 82 down Frenchmen Street, as we're doing now, the end of the block where the LGBT bookstore is today. He had a stroke, fell and died. Washboard Chaz Blues Trio. More than a trio today. Thanks for watching, y'all. Gonna step off momentarily, but we'll be visiting this place again soon to see how things are progressing. Like and comment and subscribe per usual. And if y'all would like to tip your guide, down in the notes is where you'll find the means to do so. Thank y'all so much for the support and keeping things going in these continually weird times. You're a lifesaver. So, thanks for walking with me. Have an excellent and musical night.